They had everything: gold, power, unlimited pleasure. But in just one night, they were convicted of a crime they didn't even know they committed. A crime against the Creator himself. And that is just the beginning. Imagine such a green valley, so lush that it looked like a piece of Eden lost on earth. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah flourished there. A paradise by the salty sea, rich in commerce, culture, and lust. Walking between the rich palaces and busy squares of Sodom and Gomorrah, I could contemplate the opulence mixed with decay. The shining gold who adorned the inhabitants' robes contrasted with the dirt of the dark alleys, where dark secrets were whispered at midnight. Amid extravagant banquets and endless parties, I realized the emptiness in the eyes of those who had everything but did not know true peace. The lust was as present as the air that was breathing, involving each inhabitant in a web of ephemeral pleasures and unbridled passions. The laughs echoed through the narrow streets, while the shadows lengthened, revealing the souls corrupted for years of excessive indulgence. Sodom and Gomorrah were like beautiful poisoned apples, whose sweet pulp hid a rotten core about to break. The brightness of the jewelry and the exotic perfume of the spices could not mask the sin odor that pervaded every stone of the imposing walls, built with sweat and tears of slaves, explored in the name of greed. It was as if the earth itself cried under the weight of evil that flourished in its fertile fields. And there I was, a lonely observer in the face of the Dantesque spectacle of a civilization on the edge of the abyss. As I watched the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah from the top of a nearby hill, I could feel the iniquity hanging in the air like a dense and oppressive mist. Every scream of unbridled pleasure, every sinful act committed in the shadows echoed like a silent thunder in my heart. It was as if the earth itself moaned under the weight of the transgression that spread like a plague. God's action plan was clear but terrible. The iniquity of those cities had reached such magnitude that their cry had come to heaven, demanding immediate divine justice. Amid the false brightness of the accumulated riches and the ostentation perverted by the excessive lust, I realized that those golden walls hid obscure secrets and hearts plunged into the deepest depravity. That was not just a common judgment, it was a warning to all humanity over the limits that should not be exceeded. God's gaze present at that moment was the foreshadowing of a dark destiny reserved for those who challenged divine law. As I watched the horizon, I saw 3 figures approaching on the dusty way toward my tent. Their faces were not common, emanating a divine light that illuminated the dusk as if it were noon. My heart, in recognizing them, was filled with reverence and fear of the heavenly presence. I knew those visitors were not simple travelers, but messengers of the eternal. With trembling hands, I prepared a frugal meal and invited them to rest to the welcoming shadow of my housing. As we shared bread and wine, his words resonated in my soul as silent thunder. "Do you know the divine plan for Sodom and Gomorrah?" asked me with serene voices loaded with transcendental meaning. The announcement of the imminent judgment on those clandestine cities made my chest burning in silent supplication for a glimpse of mercy in the inflexible look of the Almighty. The responsibility to intercede for the righteous in that condemned land weighed like a mountain on my shoulders, aged by the tireless walk of life. As I watched the night fall, a feeling of restlessness began to settle in my heart, a feeling that something sinister hovered in the air, like a storm forming on the distant horizon. It was at this moment that I spotted 3 figures slowly approaching along the dusty path toward my modest tent. His steps were firm. His robes shone with an inexplicable brightness, bathing the dark road with a heavenly light that illuminated the imminent darkness of the night. A chill traveled my spine by recognizing the divine presence that materialized before my astonished eyes. With a mixture of fear and reverence, I hurried a simple meal, but made with all care and respect, knowing that I was facing messengers of the Most High. I invited visitors to rest in the fresh shadow of my tent and offered them bread and wine as a sign of hospitality and respect. While we were to share that simple meal, their voices sounded like heavenly songs to my ears, tired by the arduous journey of life. It was then that they revealed the mission they brought with them to announce the dark fate reserved for the lost cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. The weight of divine words echoed in my soul as a silent thunder, as I tried to process the magnitude of judgment about to be triggered on those cursed lands by depravity and sin. Amid the apparent peace of that starry night, I felt the growing tension that preceded that final storm that would sweep everything from the map and leave only ashes where there were once lush landscapes. Lot offered his hospitality to the angels, disguised as innocent travelers, while the wicked men of the city demanded impure relationships with the strangers without knowing that they were challenging forces far beyond their human understanding. Rituals, and thus unfolded the prelude to the imminent tragedy about Sodom and Gomorrah. As he witnessed the unfolding of events on that fateful night, I saw the enraged crowd surrounding Lot's house with an insane and wicked desire that manifested itself in the eyes of those men. They violently demanded that Lot handed them the visitors, without compassion or respect for the hospitality offered. I was able to feel fear taking over the heart of that righteous man before the terrible perspective of sacrificing his own security to protect his heavenly guests. In an act of despair and courage, Lot offered even his virgin daughters as a guarantee, seeking to preserve the inviolability of his divine guests. The depravity was not only evident, it was glaring, wide open in the insensitivity of the attackers, who did not retreat in the face of the horror that was drawn on that dark night. And then, in a moment of divine intervention, the angels revealed their true nature and pulled Lot into the house, while with an invisible touch, they wounded the whole crowd with instant blindness. The resulting turmoil echoed through the narrow streets, while previously confident men gripped, unable to find their target or retaliate against that supernatural attack. What should be a night of grotesque and merciless pleasures became a chaotic scenario where despair replaced lust and fear swallowed the once arrogant hearts. Divine justice had acted, but is that enough to change the destinations sealed by sin? Still, even in the face of this tangible supernatural manifestation of heavenly wrath against human abominations in Sodom and Gomorrah, he hovered the uncertainty about the dark future of those condemned cities. While observing the tumult caused by divine blindness inflicted on the wicked of the city, a sense of urgency took over me. The angels, with their firm hands, pulled me into the house, while the chaos outside was silently spread through the narrow streets of Sodom. The feeling of being on the imminence of divine judgment was overwhelming, as if every beat of my heart echoed the distant sound of the approaching storm, announced thunder. While the desperate screams echoed through the city wrapped in darkness, I knew there was no time to waste. The heavenly messengers warned me with firm and compassionate words, "Get up, take your wife, and your 2 daughters who are here, that you will not perish in the iniquity of this city." I then realized the seriousness of the situation and the urgency of the moment. With hasty steps and the heavy heart of fear of the imminent fate, I guided my family out of the turbulent Sodom walls. It was an escape against time, a race for life in the face of the certainty of the imminent destruction that hovered over those lands cursed by sin. Under the trembling light of the full moon, we leave behind our homes and belongings, discarding earthly bonds in exchange for the fragile chance of survival offered by divine mercy. The order was clear and unappealable. "Escapes your life, do not look behind you, nor perish throughout this campina, runs away to the mount so that you do not perish." Each step towards salvation was an act of surrender and obedience to divine will, expressed by angels sent as guides in the midst of growing darkness. The weight of the divine words echoed in the night's silence as I walked away from the steaming rubble that were once my lives, gold veiled with unspeakable sins. As we ran desperate to escape divine wrath about to shake up on Sodom and Gomorrah, the unquestionable words of the heavenly messengers were echoed in my ears: "Flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor perish throughout this campina, runs away to the mount, so that you do not perish." The warmth of heavenly fire was a suffocating presence on my back, urging my heart to continue towards the promised salvation in the immensity of the horizon. My wife, whose determination was fragile under the weight of the definitive farewell of our once safe address, felt the call of the seductive past that cried for her attention. The order was clear as pure crystal, but his heart was still divided between attachment to the world that fell on fire and the promise of an uncertain tomorrow. In a lapse fleeting of unbelief and nostalgia, she disobeyed the divine command and turned her tired eyes back. What I witnessed then was more than a deserved punishment. It was the tragic sealing of an irrevocable destination. Faced with the visceral manifestation of divine justice, I saw my beloved become a statue of salt, motionless and silent as a monument to the fatal hesitation that reaped its existence without remorse. Each grain of salt that made up its new being was a bitter memory of the erroneous choice made in the crossroads between obedience and rebellion. But there was no time for late regrets or regrets. The journey for life continued before the astonished eyes of the survivors of that heavenly hecatomb. As I observed the city of Sodom and Gomorrah being consumed by divine wrath, I could feel the scorching heat of fire and sulfur that fell from the sky like rain of death over those lands cursed by sin. The resounding roar of the devouring flames echoed throughout the plain, mingling with the desperate screams of those whose lives faded in the midst of hell that materialized before our astonished eyes. It was not only the intense glow of the flames that overshadowed my vision, but the overwhelming sensation of witnessing the relentless wrath of the triggered Creator about a corrupted humanity beyond any redemption. The proud buildings erected with blood-stained hands leaned like deck cards under the impact of the devouring flames, while the streets once busy were transformed into incandescent lava rivers that consumed everything in their way. The launching screams of the condemned echoed as eternal lamentations as the divine sentence was inexorably fulfilled. It was an apocalyptic scene, a scenario of desolation where there was no mercy or hope, only the bitter certainty of justice finally made against those whose heart had been hardened by depravity and disobedience. And I, a simple spectator before the divine catastrophe, felt my being shudder at the magnitude of heavenly judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. As I watched the steaming ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah, a question reverberated in my restless mind. Did those lost cities really exist beyond biblical tale? The traces of the catastrophic destruction I witnessed with my own eyes seemed to scream in silence the truth of the divine narrative. Amid the weight of archaeological evidence and the ancestral reports that echo through the centuries, doubt persists between the wise and the unbelievers. Some skeptics question whether the story of Sodom and Gomorrah would not just be a legend, an edifying fable created to teach a moral lesson to future generations. However, the evidence found in the regions near the Dead Sea, such as the site of Tel Hammon, revealed traces of a sudden catastrophe. Large sulfur deposits spread throughout the region, and unique geological formations corroborate the biblical narrative of an overwhelming divine judgment. Historical reports, such as those of the Josephus historian, add to the complex plot that involves the real existence of these condemned cities. In the eyes of science, the clues are clear. Something extraordinary happened there. Given these tangible evidence, I realize that the Bible is not just a compendium of legendary stories. It is a sacred record that resonates with supernatural events, capable of challenging our limited understanding as human beings. Thus, even in the face of skeptical controversies and questions, the tragic saga of Sodom and Gomorrah remains an eternal alert on the limits of human depravity and the inexorable justice of the Most High. As I reflect on the impressive history of Sodom and Gomorrah, I am led to contemplate the depths of divine mercy and the firmness of His righteousness. This biblical narrative is not merely an account of the past, but a continuous echo that resonates in our hearts to the present day. By witnessing the overwhelming destruction that has been slaughtered on those immunity cities, we are confronted with a universal truth. God is compassionate, but also just. Your patience may be infinite, but its wrath is relentless in the face of unbridled iniquity and deliberate rebellion. The tragedy of Sodom and Gomorrah reveals the devastating consequences of the disobedience and removal of the ways of the Lord. Each steaming ruin, every cry silenced by divine fire, echoes as a solemn reminder that the choice for lust and depravity can lead to eternal perdition. However, even in the midst of the most severe divine judgment, there is room for redemption. Those who, as Lot, choose to obey the voice of God are spared from imminent destruction. Their lives are transformed not only by the mercy granted, but also by the recognition of the sovereignty of the Most High over all things. In this sense, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah invites us to a deep reflection on our own choices and the course of our lives. Are we anchored in unshakable obedience to divine will? Or are we letting ourselves seduce by the passenger pleasures of this world? May we learn from the past to shape our future with wisdom and submission to the larger plan established by the one who is eternal. May this biblical lesson serve as a lighthouse in the darkness of unbelief and lead us to the narrow path of eternal salvation. Share this impactful account and allow more lives to be touched by the powerful message of biblical history about Sodom and Gomorrah. May this narrative arouse deep reflections on faith, obedience, and consequences of human choices. Subscribe to more inspiring content